Good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called Macduff Lives. And tonight, reading another chapter from Population Control by Jim Marrs. Let's see. Andy, can you hear me? I'd like to hear from you in the headphones. And if I can hear from you, then I would ask you a little quick question. Well, perhaps there you are.
I believe you can only hear me if I add myself to the stream. So
well, everybody, welcome Andy Dybala to our screen tonight. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question. I didn't want to get the name of the new project wrong. So could you explain to people what you're doing up there with Aaron and Neighborhood News, the new project, please?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me on to do this, actually. I just wanted a little quick mention, but Aaron Adler, Mark Buckley, George Webb, a little Addy Ads, and myself, we're starting a little nighttime project here called Research Revival. You can find us on YouTube right now. All you got to do is just go to Research Revival. You'll see the fire icon I made and give it a follow. Directly after the reading tonight, we'll be doing a show. George will be joining us, and Mr. Buckley and Mr. Adler will be hosting the show. So we're looking to break down a lot of the research we've been doing throughout the past month or so, and dig into a little bit and share it with our audience. And we hope you guys can join us, and I appreciate you letting me get a chance to showcase our new channel.
You bet, Andy. And that'll be then right after this show, so that 9 o'clock tonight, just go right on over to the new channel.
Research Revival.
Research Revival. I like the idea, the theme of it. It's kind of like a great awakening, a revival.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're going for a little bit, Everyone gotta dig into the research a little bit. But I'm gonna sign out the rest of the show. Enjoy the reading, ladies and gentlemen. Apparently, I can't talk right now, but hopefully John can better than I.
All right, pressure's on me now. Thank you very much, Andy. And Research Revival following this show at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. Okay, well, I'm skipping chapter 6 about it's called Gone to Pot. Before I start, let me just review some of the things that Jim Marrs has already covered in the book. The first one, an introduction, and then depopulation, the deadly God syndicate, of course, that guns, oil, and drugs, deadly medicine, deadly vaccines, gone to pot, which I'm skipping, and now psychiatric drugs and shooters. Chapter 7 of Population Control, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us, by Jim Marrs. During the debate over marijuana legislation, a dark side to the use of legal drugs was largely overlooked. Because of the overuse and mishandling of legal prescription drugs, America has experienced a terrifying rise in teen suicides, school shootings, and the deaths of many veterans. Then Secretary of Veteran Affairs Eric Shinseki reported in November 2009 that, quote, more veterans have committed suicide since 2001 than we have lost on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan, unquote. In May 2014, another shooting by a seemingly average kid rocked the nation. 22-year-old Elliot Rodger killed 6 people and injured 13 others in a rampage in Isla Vista, California. That ended with his taking his own life. Immediately, his father and the corporate mass media began the drumbeat, blaming guns for the carnage, despite the fact that Rodger's first 3 kills were with a knife. There were no calls for registering or outlawing bladed instruments. Although Roger also rammed at least one victim with his car, no one called for outlawing automobiles. In a, quote, manifesto left behind, Rogers stated, quote, "I was different because I am of mixed race. I am half white, half Asian, and this made me different from the normal, fully white kids that I was trying to fit in with. I envied the cool kids. I wanted to be one of them," unquote. This prompted cries that racial hatred was to blame for Rogers's crime. One of Rogers's victims, 20-year-old Bianca DeCock, who survived 5 gunshots, told how he wore a, quote, smirky, grimacy smile as he gunned down her sorority sisters. "He wanted to do this. He looked happy about it," she told the news media. Elliot Rodger was only the latest in a string of young men involved in shooting incidents. The corporate mass media always blames firearms for the shootings, but a look at history reveals that prior to the 1968 Gun Control Act, any person could legally own all sorts of weapons, including machine guns. Yet, these guns prompted no school shootings. What the media fails to mention is the common denominator in so many of these shootings: psychiatric drugs. Of course, gun makers, unlike pharmaceutical companies, do not spend millions on advertising. Few in the media have detailed the fact that Roger was being treated for psychological and psychiatric issues. In his own words, he said, quote, "I will quickly swallow all the Xanax and Vicodin pills I have left." Is it not possible that Roger's mental illness and the psychiatric drugs with which he was being treated are at least partially responsible for his heinous deeds? As Roger's story illustrates, drugs may play a significant role in the recent spate of senseless public shootings, though in this case the drugs are legal. And as we see from Roger's case, these drugs are being prescribed to more and more young people, frequently under the age of 18. When dangerous psychiatric medications are mixed with the typical tensions of an adolescent life, the results can be deadly. Rather than continually send heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims, it is time for lawmakers to investigate the connection between prescription psychiatric drugs and violence. In nearly every school shooting, including the 1999 tragedy at Columbine High School, the shooters were medicated. In July 2012, James Holmes walked into a midnight showing of a Batman movie in Aurora, Colorado, and killed 12 people, wounding 58 others. The Denver Post reported Holmes was taking a generic form of the drug Zoloft. The fact that Sung-Hui Cho, who killed 32 persons at Virginia Tech in April 2007, had been undergoing psychological counseling involving the use of prescription psychoactive drugs was rarely mentioned in the mass media. In fact, the prescription drug use of other mass murderers remains unclear because authorities have sealed their medical records from the public. It is known that Army Specialist Ivan Lopez, who killed 4 persons, including himself, in an April 2014 shooting at Fort Hood, Texas, was being treated with Ambien and other medication for anxiety and depression. Likewise, Aaron Alexis, who killed 12 persons at the Washington Navy Yard in 2013, was being treated with the antidepressant trazodone. Sometimes the psychiatric drugs themselves are a factor, as withdrawal from selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors can be particularly unpleasant. British psychiatrist Dr. David Healy notes that, quote, "almost all the school shooters that we know of have either been on or using these drugs or in withdrawal from them, a condition called SSRI discontinuation syndrome. While certain states of depression undoubtedly can be soothed by such SSRIs as Paxil, Prozac, Zoloft, Effexor, and others, Dr. Healy warned, you can become emotionally numb when you go on these drugs. That means you can do things you wouldn't normally contemplate doing." The website ssristories.org has begun to explore the potentially deadly effect of these drugs. It offers a collection of more than 5,000 accounts from popular media and scientific journals in which prescription drugs were associated with a variety of deviant acts, many of them violent. Withdrawal, especially abrupt withdrawal from any of these medications, can cause severe neuropsychiatric and physical symptoms, warned a post on this site. Withdrawal is sometimes more severe than the original symptoms or problems. Several stories recounted on the site involved the violent behavior of patients who had gone off their medication. One example was the tragedy of 35-year-old Derek Ward, who in October 2014 decapitated his mother, Pat, who had scheduled an appointment with a psychiatrist in 2 days to replenish her son's SSRI medications. Ward, who according to his family had been off his medications only 4 days, later died when he threw himself in front of a train. Even the government has acknowledged the dangers of SSRI. In 2004, the FDA ordered pharmacies to provide to all parents or guardians for youngsters 18 and under a, quote, antidepressant patient medication guide, which stated in part, quote, call healthcare provider right away if you or your family member has any of the following symptoms: acting aggressive, being angry or violent, and acting on dangerous impulses. Never stop an antidepressant medicine without first talking to a healthcare provider. Stopping an antidepressant medicine suddenly can cause other symptoms. There are about 25 million Americans on SSRI drugs. If only 0.1% react violently to the drugs, that's still 25,000 potential mass murderers. Of greatest concern is the frequency with which these drugs are being prescribed. Early on, only severe cases of depression or anxiety were thought to warrant psychiatric drugs, but today, virtually any school kid may be subject to drug treatment, sometimes even against their will or their parents' knowledge. One such example is Chelsea Rhodes, a 15-year-old sophomore at Penn High School in Mishawaka, Indiana, who was pulled out of her classroom and told to sign a form, then was administered a teen-screen psychological assessment test. The test included such questions as, have you had trouble sleeping, that is, trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early? Have you had less energy than you usually do? Has doing even little things made you feel really tired? Has it often been hard for you to make up your mind or to make decisions? Have you often had trouble keeping your mind on your schoolwork or other things? Have you often felt grouchy or irritable and often in a bad mood when even little things would make you mad? Have you gained a lot of weight, more than just a few pounds? Have you lost weight, more than just a few pounds? Like many teen students, Chelsea did as she was told and never asked if the test was voluntary. After the test, she was told she suffered from, quote, obsessive-compulsive disorder for cleaning and social anxiety disorder. She was told to seek medical treatment. Dr. Julian Whitaker, author and founder of the Whitaker Wellness Institute in Newport Beach, California, asked, since when are issues with sleeping, energy, and feeling tired indicative of a mental illness? What kid or adult, for that matter, hasn't at one time or another in the last 4 weeks felt indecisive, unfocused, grouchy, or irritable? And the questions about weight are just plain nuts. Adolescents are expected to have growth spurts. But other test questions were less anodyne. They included, have you thought seriously about killing yourself? Have you tried to kill yourself in the last 4 weeks? Have you ever in your whole life tried to kill yourself or made a suicide attempt? As Dr. Whitaker remarked, quote, one thing is for certain, if they've never given any thought to suicide, they will now. The girls' parents, Michael and Teresa Rhodes, filed suit against the school, claiming their parental rights were violated since the school administered the psychological test without their permission. Representatives of the school arguing that teen screen test was optional and confidential moved for a summary judgment from the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Indiana, expecting to win as they usually do. However, noting that the school had not made clear that the test was voluntary and had not even filled in the name of any person or persons to whom the questions were to be referred, the court ruled in the parents' favor. This particular case was a victory for parents, privacy, and common sense, but many other children in the U.S. schools have not been so lucky. A 2014 study based on information from the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics indicated that almost 11% of school children ages 4 to 17 are now taking psychiatric drugs for emotional or behavioral problems. Many of these medications purport to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, a condition in the past described simply as restlessness or acting out of boredom. Such medications disproportionately harm certain groups of children. The study found that children from poorer families were more likely to be medicated than their well-to-do peers, and that boys were more frequently prescribed psychiatric meds than girls. Yet the science behind the so-called ADHD epidemic is not well supported. Some researchers, such as behavioral neurologist Richard Saul, do not even believe that ADHD exists. Noting that the number of adults taking a drug for ADHD has increased 53% between 2008 and 2012, and nearly doubled for young persons, Saul noted, today, the fifth edition of the DSM only requires one to exhibit 5 of 18 possible symptoms to qualify for an ADHD diagnosis. If you haven't seen the list, look it up. It will probably bother you. How many of us can claim that we have difficulty with organization or a tendency to lose things, that we are frequently forgetful or distracted or fail to pay close attention to details? Under these subjective criteria, the entire U.S. population could potentially qualify. We've all had these moments, and in moderate amounts, they're a normal part of the human condition. As more than 20 conditions can lead to symptoms similar to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has too often become a diagnosis of choice that saves time for doctors and generates huge profits for the drug corporations. Even more disturbing is the number of very young children who are being prescribed these medications. According to a report by the CDC, more than 10,000 American toddlers on Medicaid were being medicated for maladies outside established pediatric guidelines, and an additional 4,000 children covered under private insurance plans were being medicated. It's absolutely shocking, and it shouldn't be happening, said a children's mental health consultant to the Carter Center. People are just feeling around in the dark. We obviously don't have our act together for little children, commented Anita Zervigon-Hakes, a consultant to the Carter Center in Atlanta, where the report on children was presented in May 2014. Dr. Susanna Visser, who oversaw the CDC's ADHD research, agreed, quote, families of toddlers with behavior problems are coming to the doctor's office for help, and the help they're getting too often is a prescription for a Class 2 controlled substance, which has not been established as safe for that young of a child. It puts these children and their developing minds at risk, and their health is at risk, warned Dr. Visser. Dr. Nancy Rappaport, a child psychiatrist and director of school-based programs at the Cambridge Health Alliance outside Boston, specializes in underprivileged youth, many coming from broken homes. In acting out and being hard to control, they're signaling the chaos in their environment, she remarked. Of course, only some homes are like this, but if you have a family with domestic violence, drug or alcohol abuse, or a parent neglecting a 2-year-old, the kid might look impulsive or aggressive. And the parent might just want a quick fix. and the easiest thing to do is medicate. It's a travesty. Where once a daydreaming child was simply chastised by a teacher who ordered them to stay with the rest of the class, today they are sent to the school nurse, who, more often than not, refers them to a psychologist inclined to prescribe medications such as Ritalin and Adderall. These drugs can calm a child's hyperactivity, but also have their share of serious potential side effects, including growth suppression, insomnia, and hallucinations. It's easy to see why it might not be the best idea to cause young children to experience these effects. The American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines do not cover children below the age of 4 because the Academy considers hyperactivity developmentally appropriate for toddlers and understands that more time is needed to see if a disorder truly is present. Despite this policy, one of the worst offenders in this unprecedented drugging of youth is Medicaid. As reported by the Alliance for Natural Health in 2013, the number of children, many of them under the age of 3, on Medicaid who are taking antipsychotic drugs has tripled in just 10 years. Between 1999 and 2008, the amount Medicaid spends on antipsychotic drugs more than doubled. The program currently spends $3.8 billion annually on antipsychotics, more than it spends on any other class of drugs. A spokesman for the Texas Health and Human Services Commission defended such drugging by claiming the prescriptions were to help infants, quote, with discomfort. Many of the antipsychotics used today are second and third generation antipsychotics with bizarre names, such as Abilify, the nation's top-selling prescription drug, Risperdal, Seroquel, and Zyprexa. These drugs have replaced first-generation antipsychotics such as Haldol and Thorazine, though the side effects remain. As the ANH notes, keep in mind that common side effects for one common psychiatric medication include a shuffling walk, drooling, rapid weight gain, and the inability to speak. This list would give any adult pause. The fact that these drugs are being prescribed to infants is unconscionable. And the financial repercussions are equally damning. Due to the large number of people receiving antipsychotics who are on Medicaid, a full 70% of the total spent on these drugs in the U.S. is footed by the taxpayers. Quote, "This is nothing less than crony capitalism in action," noted the ANH. And I'm sorry, the ANH is, I believe, the Alliance for Natural Health. Pharmaceutical companies donate heavily to political campaigns, and legislators pass laws that compensate them in spades for the amount donated. Those who pay the real price are the poor and powerless. The organization added that there is no corporate incentive for such essentials as nutrition, exercise, and love, as these pursuits cannot be patented. In addition to the mind-warping aspects of psychiatric drugs, recent studies show that memories can now be both created and erased through the use of drugs and the use of light to stimulate certain sections of the brain. Neuroscientists at the University of California, San Diego found that by using light to activate neurons in the brains of rats, they were able to activate certain proteins that induced false memories. Research team leader Roberto Malinau reported, quote, "We can make a memory of something that the animal never experienced before." He added, "We were playing with memory like a yo-yo. If this can be done in rats, it can be done in humans." Some researchers believe it's entirely possible that the globalists, even now, are attempting to manipulate the minds of American citizens by funding research such as that in San Diego, as well as supporting legislation for mass mental analysis. The U.S. Preventative Services Task Force has urged routine screening for all American teenagers for depression. And politicians were ready to step up to the plate. Congress has periodically introduced legislation proposing widespread mental health screening. In 2007, legislation was introduced entitled the Postpartum Mood Disorders Prevention Act, which called for the mental screening of mothers for signs of depression. Such mandatory screening for depression may soon become state law in Illinois, and similar legislation has been adopted or at least introduced in several other states. In 2009, this mass screening scheme was proposed again in the form of the Melanie Blocker Stokes Mom's Opportunity to Access Health, Education, Research, and Support for Postpartum Depression Act of 2009, otherwise known simply as the Mothers Act. This law was reintroduced into both bodies of the new Congress in January 2009 after the 2007 bill died in the Senate. Critics of the Mothers Act, fearful that the legislation would mandate even further drugging of both mothers and infants, were incensed to learn that the same provisions were contained within President Obama's 2010 Affordable Care Act. In an article entitled Branding Pregnancy as a Mental Illness, Byron Richards noted, quote, "The Mothers Act has the net effect of reclassifying the natural process of pregnancy and birth as a mental disorder that requires the use of unproven and extremely dangerous psychotropic medications, which can also easily harm the child." The bill was obviously written by the big pharma lobby, and its passage into law would be considered laughable, except that it is actually happening. Investigative journalist Evelyn Pringle, writing for the political newsletter Counterpunch, wrote, quote, "The true goal of the promoters of this act is to transform women of childbearing age into lifelong consumers of psychiatric treatment by screening women for a whole list of mood and anxiety disorders and not simply postpartum depression. Enough cannot be said about the ability of anyone with a white coat and a medical title to convince vulnerable pregnant women and new mothers that the thoughts and feelings they experience on any given day might be abnormal." One can clearly see that the susceptibility to drug abuse by new mothers whose mental equilibrium is already shaky because of the rigors of childbirth, and especially first-time mothers concerned over the health of both their child and themselves. Many people feel the drugs and vaccines being administered to children have not been fully tested or guaranteed safe. They feel children are being used as guinea pigs for big pharma, and that such indiscriminate drugging amounts to nothing less than chemical child abuse. Health Ranger Mike Adams pondered, "I often wonder when the rest of the country will wake up and notice that the mass drugging of our nation's children has gone too far. Why isn't the mainstream media giving this front page coverage? Why aren't the lawmakers demanding an end to the chemical abuse of our children? Why isn't the FDA halting these trials on toddlers out of plain decency?" You already know the answer, because they're all making money from this chemical assault on our nation's children. The doctors, hospitals, drug companies, psychiatrists, and mainstream media all profit handsomely from the sales of mind-altering drugs to children. Ethics will never get in the way of old-fashioned greed, unquote. Such drugging of future generations also advances the globalist goal of societal control. Adams and many other concerned parents say children should be given more sunshine, playtime, and access to nature rather than drugs. They say this is the historically proven and common sense approach to producing balanced, healthy children. But psychiatry has no common sense, argued Adams, and no one in the industry dares mention that most so-called mental disorders are really just caused by nutritional imbalances. Because to admit to the truth about the mental health of children would be to render their careers irrelevant. The ultimate issue in deciding where to draw the line on which behaviors are normal and which require some sort of intervention. Bipolar disorder, a psychiatric disorder describing persons, usually children, who display a wide range of emotions from exuberant highs to depressing lows, is seen by some as merely the normal ups and downs of the growth process. Critics are quick to note that there is no scientific means to confirm a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. In a 2009 interview in Psychology Today, David Healy, former secretary of the British Association for Psychopharmacology and author of Mania, a book on bipolar disorder, acknowledged that this disorder is somewhat of a mythical entity. Quote, the problems that currently are grouped under the heading bipolar disorder are akin to problems that in the 1960s and 70s would have been called anxiety and treated with tranquilizers, or during the 1990s would have been labeled depression and treated with antidepressants, he said. Healy described claims that imbalances of enzymes such as serotonin to explain mood swings as unsubstantiated biobabble. What's astonishing is how quickly these terms were taken up by popular culture and how widely, with many people now routinely referring to their serotonin levels being out of whack when they are feeling wrong or unwell, he said. Some feel it is fortunate there were no synthetic psychiatric drugs available to dull the moods of the master artist Vincent van Gogh, who some historians believe suffered from bipolar disorder. Pardon me. And even for those who lack Van Gogh's genius but exhibit some behavioral issues, the drugs they are being prescribed are leading to disastrous effects. A 2014 study by researchers from the Bloomberg School of Public Health found that prenatal exposure to selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, was associated with autism spectrum disorder and developmental delays in boys. Nearly 1,000 mother-child pairs were included in the population-based case control study, which also found that young boys were more likely to be affected by the development problems than girls. We found prenatal SSRI exposure was nearly 3 times as likely in boys with ASD relative to typical development, with the greatest risk when exposure took place during the first trimester. ASD referring to autism spectrum disorder. The research illustrates the challenge for women and their physicians to balance the risks versus the benefits of taking SSRI medications, with everyone from infants to senior citizens being drugged for both real and imagined mental disorders. It is troubling to note that one group in particular has been targeted for selective drugging: our military service personnel. Well, I'm going to go ahead into Chapter 8, since Chapter 7 was a bit short, and maybe read another 10 or 15 minutes before I call it a night, and give us all a chance to go refill our beverages for the 9 o'clock show of the premiere of Research Revival on YouTube. Chapter 8, Drugging the Military. Each Memorial Day, the United States is inundated with patriotic zeal. War documentaries, ceremonies, and speeches honor the men and women of the military services. Politicians and corporations expound on the support for our veterans. Yet, contrary to all this flag waving, not to mention President Obama's pledge that he will not stand for mistreatment of veterans on his watch, the lives of vets are fraught with inattention and insecurity, even harassment. Large numbers of vets are impoverished, unemployed, struggling with depression, and experiencing substandard treatment by the Department of Veteran Affairs. 1/3 of all homeless Americans are veterans. And these days, we can add one more troubling fact to this list. Many military veterans are being prescribed questionable drugs. In order to understand the prescription drug scandal as it relates to the military, we must first look at the broader healthcare issues facing many veterans. First of all, many of them lack access to even basic medical services. In mid-2014, an audit of 731 medical facilities by the VA revealed that more than 57,000 new patients had been waiting more than 90 days for an initial appointment. About 64,000 who had been enrolled in the system for up to a decade still had not seen a doctor. The long delays veterans face exacerbate many existing problems and in some cases even lead to death. Master Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff, a member of the organizing committee at Concerned Veterans for America, said that while the government has admitted to about 40 deaths in the Phoenix area, with dozens more facilities under investigation, the real number is much higher. Let's go to the backlog they had. 53 veterans died a day just waiting on their benefits in 2011, said Duff. The VA itself has those numbers. We're talking about egregious mismanagement, a culture of corruption that was allowing all these executives to give the impression that they had 14 days of waiting time, not months and months of waiting time, so they could get bonuses. So I expect it will be several hundred, if not thousands. She gave an example of veterans in Albuquerque suffering from such ailments as gangrene, heart disease, and brain tumors. Yet, these veterans were forced to wait more than 4 months for treatment. Even for basic treatments taken for granted by many Americans, veterans are forced to jump through hoops to receive care. Duff reported that in Harlingen, Texas, the VA decided that servicemen had to come back for 3 separate screenings before they qualified for a colonoscopy. What disappoints me the most out of this is that it was deliberate. I used to think it was just mismanagement. I've been reporting on mismanagement for the past year. Now I realize it was all deliberate and it was all in the name of an almighty dollar, said Duff. I'm so shocked and saddened to know that executives at the highest level were training their employees to hide numbers, training their employees to make it look like veterans were only waiting 14 days. Duff decried efforts to throw more tax dollars at the VA, saying they have a $150 billion budget. They requested $160 billion. They've never been denied anything from the Senate or the House as far as their budget goes. In Phoenix, a mere 39% of this budget goes for actual medical costs, she reported, with 52% going for administrative costs, including the purchase of expensive office furniture. She added another $6 million was spent on a sparsely attended national conference in Orlando, Florida. They've wasted thousands and thousands and millions of dollars. The money is simply being mismanaged, declared Duff. What makes the VA scandal different is not only that it affected people at the most desperate moment of need and continues to affect them at subpar facilities, wrote Slate's chief political correspondent John Dickerson. It is also a failure of one of the most basic transactions government is supposed to perform, keeping a promise to those who were asked to protect our very form of government. The growing scandal points out more than just incompetence. When the wait times were long and those promises were being broken to veterans, administrators then lied about it. It appears this was true across the country. Former presidential candidate Ron Paul saw the scandal in even grander terms. We should remember that though the VA's alleged abuse and neglect of U.S. veterans is scandalous, the worst abuse comes from a president and a compliant Congress that send the U.S. military to cause harm and be harmed overseas in undeclared, unnecessary, and illegal interventions. In mid-2014, the uproar over the VA scandal prompted the resignation of Veterans Affairs Secretary Eric Shinseki and an unusual bipartisan proposal from Congress. Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders and Arizona Republican Senator John McCain suggested legislation to correct the VA problems. The bipartisan bill would provide for 26 new VA facilities in 18 states and would provide $500 million to hire more VA doctors and nurses. In a 2-year trial project under this bill, veterans would be allowed to seek private medical help if they experienced long wait times or lived more than 40 miles from a VA facility. But the legislation did little to counteract many other issues with the program. Long wait times and inferior medical treatment are not the only concerns. As far back as 2009, the FBI launched Operation Vigilant Eagle, a program warning of, quote, militia, sovereign citizen extremist groups, to include veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. As a result of the operation, many vets have been targeted for surveillance, censored, threatened with incarceration or involuntary commitment, labeled as extremists and or mentally ill, and stripped of their Second Amendment rights. There have been instances of veterans having weapons confiscated after answering yes on questionnaires asking if they own firearms. Government policy characterizes veterans as potential domestic terrorists because they might be, quote, disgruntled, disillusioned, or suffering from the psychological effects of war, unquote. This demonization of vets has resulted in inappropriate uses of force on the part of many police departments. One example is the case of Jose Guerrena, a Marine who served 2 tours in Iraq. Guerrena was killed in 2011 after an Arizona SWAT team kicked open the door of his home during a mistaken drug raid and opened fire. Guerrena had no prior criminal record, and the police subsequently found nothing illegal in his home. In 2014, John Edward Chesney, a 62-year-old Vietnam veteran, was also killed by a SWAT team, which responded to a call that the Army veteran was standing in his apartment window waving what looked like a semi-automatic rifle. Instead of attempting to make contact with the man or figure out what he was holding, SWAT officials fired 12 rounds into Cheney's apartment window. It turned out that the gun Chesney was pointing was a, quote, realistic-looking mock assault rifle. In a situation similar to Chesney's, though with a less disastrous conclusion, another Iraq War veteran, 25-year-old Raymond Hooks, was arrested and charged with criminal mischief after a Homeland Security agent reported him as an active shooter, even though Hooks was merely practicing with a pellet gun. Against the background of this widespread mistreatment of veterans, it's no surprise that when it comes to medication and drugs, they face additional problems. Many of these medications and treatments make veterans' health problems after returning home even worse. The vaccines routinely administered to U.S. troops are one issue of concern, in particular, the fact that these vaccines contain squalene. Squalene is an organic compound originally derived from shark liver oil and used as an adjuvant or additive to immunization vaccines. An oil molecule native to the body, squalene is found in trace amounts throughout a person's nervous system and brain. What differentiates good from bad squalene is the route by which it enters your body. Injection is an abnormal entry route, which causes the immune system to attack all of the squalene in your body, not just the vaccine adjuvant. For years, the Department of Defense denied the presence of squalene in the anthrax vaccine. However, the FDA has tested several samples of the vaccine and found the compound present in varying levels. This late admission irritated the late Washington State Representative Jack Metcalf, who complained, "We've been told for 3 years there is no squalene in the anthrax vaccine. Then suddenly we are told, oh yes, it's there. But it's no big deal. It's everywhere." Well, I remember the problems that soldiers had, at least generally, after the Iraq war. And, not only that, but also the depleted uranium that they were exposed to. And the willingness of our military leaders to expose our soldiers to this stuff, it's just astonishing. I do believe that President Trump made things better for veterans during his term than existed at the time Jim Marrs wrote this book in 2015. And I am grateful for what appears to be a massive improvement at the VA, but clearly these problems are never are not anywhere near resolution. That our veterans are still being given, say, opiates instead of something that might do just as good for them. That they are being given these vaccines without, again, it's just like everything else that they do. If they have somebody that they can force something on, then they take advantage of that and you become a guinea pig. It's another part of Jim Marrs's book, How Corporate Owners Are Killing Us. It's overpopulation. So just about any remedy they can come up with for overpopulation seems to be fair in their book. But as with everything else, if sunshine is the answer, we have to shine a light on these abuses of children, of adults, of veterans, of old people, of humans in general, by people that are in it for the profit. Whether you're talking about big pharma or the media that sells the ads, the doctors that prescribe it, or the insurance companies that benefit so much by administering at a great profit the whole system. Well, you've got 9 minutes left to refresh your drink for the premiere of Research Revival on YouTube. So I will sign off tonight. Thanks for being with me. Remember that we are McDuff Lives, and that means all of us. McDuff lives through each and every one of you, and through all of the great colleagues that we have now springing up all over the country. Looking forward to seeing what comes up tonight at 9 o'clock at Research Revival, and I hope you'll join us. Until then, I'll sign off for now. Good night.